Well, I think when any business starts, it's always very difficult and very hard. And I especially remember the first few years. But gradually the business became more established, even though at that time there's many makes of kart out there. People seem to make a few, I think, because like when I first started, as I said, I made the first ones in a very small garage, and people often made karts at home. So you had a multitude of different makes, but very often they'd make a few karts and then disappear. But it diluted the market, so it made it more difficult to really expand and get a foothold. I think I also made things harder for myself, because also in those days, people very often just looked at whatever kart was winning and then made a copy of it. But I'd never wanted to go down that route. I suppose because I'd always been interested in design, I preferred to try and work things out myself. And if there was a problem on the track, try and design around it to alter the kart. I also felt it gave you a better understanding. Because if you just made a copy, you didn't really know what was the good reasons or the bad, or why it worked or why it didn't work. And I also felt that it's not possible to make an exact copy, because unless you have the same tubing and exactly the same components you're going to weld to the chassis, everything will always be slightly different. But even though it gave me great joy and satisfaction when it worked out, it definitely made life harder for myself by taking that approach and not the easy option of just making a copy. This makes me very proud. I think it's always been difficult to manufacture in the UK, even though we've got a very strong engineering heritage. Unfortunately, that's tended to disappear over the last 30 to 40 years. But there's been many other problems. One doesn't have an awful lot of support, perhaps from governments and other things like that. I also think back in those days, it was something that made it more difficult was somehow the UK was more removed from Europe, whether it was the English Channel, I'm not sure, but we even had different rules and regulations. So, different engines were used, and we used very much different tyres. So we ended sort of a British car had to be designed for the UK, which didn't necessarily mean it was exactly the right frame for Europe. I mean, luckily nowadays things have changed a lot, and we run very similar regulations to Europe, which I think has helped no end for the drivers and all over the teams, because they can race in this country and then just go and race in Europe as easily. I suppose, though, one of the things that I was very lucky with was, it must have been about the mid-1980s, a customer I'd actually had from my time working at Devenson's. He said that someone he knew very well, called Peter Smith, had a son who was very interested in starting karting. He was only 10, 11 at the time, which I think was the youngest age you could start then. And so I said, well, yes, I'm more than happy to talk and see if we can help him out. It became apparent that what Peter was really looking for was someone to help them and get them on the right road, and because he didn't really know anything about karting. So we came to the arrangement whereby I kept a kart for Guy and took it to the track and helped them at the first few meetings. Unfortunately, they lived in the north of England, but Guy did all his novice races at our local track. But Peter was so enthusiastic that goodness knows what time they got up in the morning, because it was about a 4-hour journey. But they were always there before signing on or practice in plenty of time, and were never late. And Guy did all his novice meetings, gradually progressed and started doing meetings all over the country. And Guy, within a couple of years, won a British Junior Championship, Peter was always so keen for Guy to progress and take the next step, that the next challenge was he started asking me about racing in Europe, which was something I hadn't really contemplated up to that point. It presented its own challenges because I've already said the rules were quite different for the UK to Europe, and in the junior class in the UK we use rotary valve engines, whereas in Europe they use reed valve engines, which I had no experience of, even though I'd had years of experience with the rotary valves. And at the time I was doing a little bit of business with Peter de Bruin in Holland, so I contacted him and asking whether he would prepare the engines for Guy, and he was more than happy to do so. That got us started in Europe, and we went to a few smaller meetings in Belgium at first, and then quickly Guy progressed to doing the Junior European Championship and the Junior World Championship, and we started to become quite successful. And in fact, at one of the Junior World Championships, was only one race each year. At South Garda, he actually, after time practice, qualified fastest and was on pole position. And we came very close a couple of times to winning the Junior World Championship. Unfortunately, we never quite pulled it off, but that gave me the determination, having come so close, that I really wanted to carry on and try and eventually beat the Italians. Well, that's an easy question to answer. Yes, without a doubt, Peter de Bruin and Lotte Hellberg. As I've already said, I was doing a little bit of business with Peter, and then obviously the relationship developed when he started preparing the engines for Guy Smith. And I was doing more and more business with Peter, who was based in Holland. And one time I was probably travelling over to Holland every 6 weeks, taking the night boat from Harwich to the Hook of Holland, and then arriving at his shop the next morning when he opened, spending all day with him. Then we'd go and have something to eat, and I'd leave and go and catch the night boat back to the UK. That went on for quite some time. During one of the trips, I was discussing with Peter about chassis, because this must have been the mid-1990s, and we were having a bit of a problem. It wasn't with Guy, it was other drivers. I wasn't sure really whether it's the drivers, the cart, the engines, whatever it was, but we weren't that competitive. And we had a chassis homologation coming up, and I was a bit dubious about what I was going to homologate. And during the conversation with Peter, he said, well, why don't you bring a kart over to Holland, and Lotte will drive it for you. And she's a world-class driver who, racing at the very top level. So I said, oh, it'd be fantastic. It would give me a good indication of where I really am, or what sort of level I'm at. So anyway, next time I went over, I took a kart with me, and we went to their local track. Lotte drove the kart, and she and Peter were conversing in Dutch most of the time, so I didn't really know what was being said. But anyway, every time I asked Lotte how was it, yes, kart's fine, Tim, fine. So that was good. Anyway, I didn't really find out exactly till we went for dinner later that evening, and I said to him, what do you think of the kart? How was it? Oh, Tim, the kart was fantastic. And it was only then that I realised that actually Lotte had broken the lap record. And it was something, to be honest, she never forgot. It was about 2 years later after that I suddenly received a phone call from Peter. I think he and Lotte were driving back from a World Championship one year. And he said, Tim, would you be interested in supplying karts for Lotte next year? Because even though she's been a factory driver for many years, she's decided she doesn't want to carry on like that anymore. She wants to become independent. So It was an absolute golden opportunity for me to, have someone who was at the very top level racing suddenly wanting to drive my kart. So, of course, I agreed. Lotta, her mechanic, and myself worked out of a small tent in the paddock, surrounded by all these big trucks from the factory teams. And even though we didn't manage to win any races, I think during the year she set 3 fastest laps. And so it was quite apparent we were very competitive. Then at the end of that year, Peter and Lotta decided they were going to start their own team. So again, we had another long conversation, because after what Peter had seen with how Lotta performed the previous year, he was keen to start the team using Gillard chassis. So we managed to come to an agreement, and one of the difficulties was that up until that point, Peter had been working, preparing factory engines, and had a big contract with one of the engine factories, and he was paid a very big retainer for it, which unfortunately I couldn't possibly pay him, so he was going to lose a lot of his income. So we came to this agreement whereby he became worldwide agent for Gillard Karts. But straight away he said, "Tim, I don't want anything to do with the UK. I've heard about all your different rules, regulations and problems, and you can deal with that," which was obviously much more sensible as I was based here anyway. But it meant that all the karts, wherever they were sold in whatever country, left the UK, went to Holland, and then were distributed from the De Bruin premises. We had that relationship, and it carried on very well, and right until the time I decided to retire at the end of 2020. As far as I'm concerned, I'll always be incredibly grateful for both Peter and Lotta and all the De Bruin family, and as far as I'm concerned, they'll always have a very big part in the Gillard history, because they were such a help to me throughout the years. Well, one of them has to be the very first kart we made, which was back in 1980, and it was, I think I started the business in March 1980, and I think the first round of the 100 National British Championship that year was in April. We managed to finish the kart, I think, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the day before the race. So took it down to the race meeting, having never been on the track before. Just for that one particular class, which was the only class racing that day, there was 165 entries, and I think they even had an F final. Basically, after the heats, the driver, Wayne Homer, put the kart on pole position, which was absolutely incredible. And we were running second in the final, and then unfortunately a few laps from the end we had a puncture in the left rear tyre. But even so, for a debut, it gave me incredible satisfaction. It was a very good start. Another thing that gave me satisfaction and I was very proud about, really, was being invited to dinner that the CIK gave to celebrate 50 years of the CIK being in existence. And they had the dinner in Geneva because they were also had a stand at an exhibition in Geneva at the same weekend, which was for I think from memory, the exhibition was something about the history of transport over the century or something, the previous century. And what the CIK did to signify their 50 years is they had one significant kart for each decade. The kart from the 1990s they were exhibiting was a Gillard Kart as driven by Kimi Räikkönen. It gave me great satisfaction and made me immensely proud that they'd chosen that kart. Any kart we've made, just to see it racing, and if the customers are happy with it, the fact it's got my name on it, and it does well and everyone's happy, that just gives you a nice satisfaction when you come away from the meeting. Well, to be honest, every time a kart bearing one's name wins a race, it feels success. But I think there's various stages that, I remember winning the first club race seemed a major success at the time. And then winning the first British Championship, which we managed to, British Junior Championship, we won with Ivan Turner in 1985. Actually beat David Coulthard as well in that time, which was quite nice, and what he managed to go on and achieve. And then another big milestone was having teamed up with Peter de Bruin and Lotte Hellberg. Was the first meeting that the PDB team did. It was at South Garda, and we won Formula A with a chap called Benjamini, and came second in Formula Super A with Kimi Räikkönen. So that was an incredible start to the partnership. And that was followed up in 2001 by first European Championship win with Carlo van Dam winning the Senior European Championship, followed by Nick de Bruin winning the same championship in 2004. And obviously, I suppose the highlight really is Oliver Oakes winning the World Championship in 2005, which I'll never forget. I mean, the emotion and the high that one gives one when you feel you've achieved the ultimate success and victory. But as I've said already, really every victory feels special in its own way for some reason, because it's something one's manufactured and made. So all victories are good and nice.